Hey, everybody. Welcome to
To
the
the
new Red Letter Leadership podcast. This is our second episode. The last episode, Jordan did a really good job of setting up our inaugural podcast with some really strong questions and conversation about being selective. And what does Jesus say about that? How we can imply healthy selectivism, if that's a word, into our organizations and teams to ensure that we have the people we need and to be able to accomplish the mission that we feel called to do, or what our organization is really trying to do and accomplish. So this podcast, the purpose is to really use the entire gospel and take the Red Letter Leadership book that Jordan Ames, myself, and Eric Albright collaborated and co-authored to help guide leaders like you out there and how to become more of a Christ-centered leader and use leadership lessons learned through the life of Christ. So, Jordan, thanks for joining me. Thanks for really kicking this thing off and coming up with a plan to do this. And really, I'm excited about the opportunity to reach as many folks as we can. Want to just talk about Jesus, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
funny when I talk to people about the book, I start to talk about it and I feel like I start to turn into a salesman, but then I kind of really recenter myself. Like, look, I'm not trying to market myself for this book. I feel like I'm marketing Jesus. So
And-
I don't know if you've kind of gotten into that a little bit,
Oh
talking to
yeah,
people about the book.
it's very easy to get into, and I've done that from the business perspective. Is like focusing too much on the revenue that I'm looking to gain or whatever, and the value that I'm here to provide. And that's what the whole purpose of the book is. And business, that's what any business is for, right? Is to get value.
Sure. Yeah. I think something we've all learned here, just to be completely transparent, is authors don't make a lot of money off of books. Being self published and what we've gone through and you've carried most of the weight. So I got to give you a lot of credit there. Learning, and this is our first time authoring a book, self publishing, and putting out a lot of money to do all that. And then you come back and talk to these companies and Amazon and businesses about publishing, and you realize, like, that's all we get per book,
Yeah,
like $1, $2. It's real, folks out there. So we ain't making any money off this book. We want you all to be centered with Jesus, and that's what it's all about.
yeah. If I could just add to that too, Ben, is like th- this book, and one of the things that we were all three of us were eager about when publishing it is getting our own copy, because although we're the authors, like it speaks to us still, right? Like it is a library of leadership lessons for us to look back and be like, oh, I wrote that, or oh, that was Ben's writing. That's really good. Like I'm still convicted, by some of the stuff I wrote. And even while I was writing a lesson, I was like, I know this is the right answer, and I know I don't do it well. So it's like we're not we're not the experts. We just have experience, have the understanding, and put it on paper so that we can learn just as much as the readers.
Wow, that's so good. And we're in a really good topic right here. So, I definitely have a pre-planned topic and some questions to talk to you about, but I don't want to walk away from this just yet. We were all three of us were so completely surprised when you were contacted by Liberty University and the divinity school, graduate school there, wanted to use our book as a required reading source for their divinity school. And we're just like, whoa, we just
For
self
sure.
published. We still have no idea how they found the book. We still don't know who this professor is that's using the book in his course. And I know, Jordan, you've sent out some emails and asking some folks so we can connect. I mean, what an exciting moment and total God moment for him to take that. But, to your point, like, we are not experts at leadership. What we are Christian men who have gone through a lot of lessons in leadership through our military career that are somewhat unique. And we've applied what we have learned in our unique military experiences and put those with the biblical gospel experience of Jesus Christ. And kind of this is what we are pulling as we went through it. And to your point, man, every time I did one of the topics that I did, or any of the ones that you or Eric did, it's just like, wow. It's like even when I go back, there's another lesson there that I didn't
Yeah.
that I didn't initially pull from. And so yeah, it's what an experience that was for us. And I'm just excited about anybody and everybody that has an opportunity to kind of read through that, and they'll pull some more stuff that we didn't probably see. So yeah, it's been a ride.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to keep going too.
Yeah, man. For this episode, the topic that we have for everybody today is really how leadership can feel lonely. The lesson that I did in the book really pulled from Mark chapter 3. And the story is when Jesus is preaching and really sharing who he is, what about the gospel, and what he's doing and his purpose, and he's doing it in his own town, and he begins to get ridiculed, uh, obviously from the teachers, who have obviously kind of questioned Jesus all along the way. But kind of a step even further during this chapter, you see where Jesus's own family is questioning what he's doing, what he's saying, and ridiculing him. And so when I wrote that piece, it was really just kind of like, gosh, when I look at that, like, how would that feel? One, like everybody's telling you you're wrong, or, you're not who you think you are or who you're saying you are. Why should we listen to you? And, a lot of leaders will get that throughout their time in a leadership position. Then you get to a step where you have your closest confidants, your family or close friends, who are saying, I'm not sure you're doing the right thing, or you're who you say you are, or, questioning decisions and things that you're doing as a leader. I just was like, man, that, that's lonely. We as leaders, as folks find themselves moving up in the maybe the corporate ladder or in rank in the military, and they find themselves, you go from this, your teammates in the cubicle or in the team room, to then as you move up, you find yourself in the office where everybody else is in the ready room or team rooms, or in the cubicles, and you're in the office, right? And you're having to make decisions and get people to do things. And then there was definitely a point in time for me where I got, in company command as a, brigade operations officer, where you are making all the decisions, and you kind of look around and you're just kind of like, man, maybe I'm tired, man, I'm confused. I'm not, you may be questioning some of the things that you're being asked to do, and you kind of look around and you feel like you don't have a lot of people to kind of talk to and confide in. And one of the things I really want to kind of dive into you with, Jordan, is while it feels lonely because you don't have the typical, large team and people around you, you don't have to be isolated. And so there's a super important distinction between feeling lonely and then moving into the dangerous place of isolation. And man, that is speaks to my heart and my spirit a lot from my experiences, and where I have in multiple seasons throughout my life isolated myself, and that gets us into dangerous territory, right? And we are not in this alone. Now, there may be times when we don't have a lot of other men around us, or friends, or family, but we are never alone. Jesus, the Holy Spirit, is with us. And, it unfortunately has taken me a long time to get to a point where I have really bought into that, and I really feel it. And so I hope that this discussion really speaks to a lot of folks around there. So I'll just kind of kick this off with a kind of question to you, Jordan. What responsibilities for you as a leader in your experience created distance or even unintentionally kind of you started to distance yourself? You start to kind of get into that isolation territory. And a lot of our fellow military buddies, can find themselves even into depression and isolation during certain times like that, where you don't almost know you're slipping into that isolation as a leader. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we started writing lessons for this book in January of 2024. And I love telling this story when I share that when we're doing something that we feel God is leading us to do, we will face opposition. We expect it. Spiritually, the enemy is going to attack. And I even was talking with some people, I think within the past several weeks, that we live in a fallen world. So if we're comfortable in a fallen world, if we're not experiencing opposition, the enemy's not attacking, then there's something wrong there. Like we are the body of Christ. We represent Christ in a
That's good.
fallen world. We're going to face those attacks, the opposition. That doesn't mean that we're going in the wrong direction and we should stop. That might often mean that we're going in the right direction and we need to learn how to handle that opposition. So I just want to share when I started writing the lessons at the beginning of this book, January 1st, 2024, within those first 7 days, the enemy started attacking. And 2024 ended up being probably one of the roughest years for my family that we've had, despite all my deployments and being away beforehand. I won't get into the details. There were there were things done, things said uh, that weren't just good for all involved. We all made mistakes. Everybody involved made mistakes. And looking back in hindsight, where I felt lonely was within shortly after those attacks started coming, and I was already starting to write these lessons, and I have this, business brand, Red Letter Leadership. People started telling me within my family, started to say, "Hey, you're doing this leadership stuff. You need to make sure you're, leading," kind of thing. And it wasn't that I had done anything specific to show that I wasn't leading. It was like, hey, things are going to get rough. You need to make sure you're leading, kind of thing. And where it felt lonely was looking back was my failure to communicate.
Mm,
Communicate with my own wife, mainly my thoughts, and make sure I was taking care of her and her emotions that she was dealing with, as well as communicate clearly to the other people involved. So I think if I would have handled the situation better from a communication standpoint, which has always been you know, full transparency, I think communication has been one of my struggles. And it's funny because I took the DISC assessment several years ago, and my style comes out as like one of the more reserved, passive. Like I'd rather just like tell you one thing and walk away. It'd be like, why do we have to have a full conversation about it? But I understand I'm learning, and God's showing me like, yeah, communication is something that needs my constant work. So that's a
mm.
situation where I felt lonely. And again, I believe it was because of my lack of communication in the situation. But
Man,
then
that's
another time I'm thinking of when I felt lonely, but it really wasn't my fault. Looking back, I don't necessarily see where I was at fault. So I was a lieutenant. I was the first lieutenant. We were kind of already done one deployment as a second lieutenant. We were in a workup, going getting ready for another deployment, and I was doing well as far as performance wise as a lieutenant was expected. Of course, I had a lot of prior enlisted experience, but I was a executive officer for a company, an infantry company of Marines. Came back from my first deployment, and they put me as a company commander until, you know, a senior captain would show up and take over, and then they'd put me somewhere else. So I was a company commander for 2 months. Early on in the workup, guy showed up, and then I got sent over to weapons company, which is like the senior company in the infantry battalion, to be their XO. That was going well. I was going to deploy as their XO, and the CO for the company, his plan was to deploy, and then after deployment, resign and move on with life, resign his commission and get out. But he decided to resign before deployment, and so he was put as the RBE commander, the remain behind element commander. And so they put me as the company commander for weapons company, the senior company, and I'm a first lieutenant, and all the other companies are senior captains. You know, like it's kind of lopsided. But my company commander held me in high regard. You know, he gave me one of the best evals I've ever gotten. So I was a company commander for that company all the way up until 2 days before he deployed, when a senior captain showed up and took that company. And then after we deployed, I was moved in the middle of deployment. I was moved to another company because the battalion commander thought there was some leadership issues going on, and he wanted me to come in and kind of help iron things out. When I get there, it didn't seem like it was as he thought. We were spread out across Europe, so things were kind of like word of mouth. But nonetheless, long story short, I was kind of bounced around as a first lieutenant for like a year and a half. Worked with some good leaders, some others weren't as good. But I left that assignment after 3 years as a lieutenant. And for the listeners, I left that assignment. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for school, and that's when I met Ben Hunter there in summer of 2005 or 2015. But yeah, so I left that assignment and was not presented with any award. My eval said I was one of the top lieutenants, but I didn't get any sort of like medal ribbon type of award, which is kind of standard for you do a good job, they
Right.
award you
Yeah.
when you're leading the. And yeah, so I didn't get any. There's lieutenants that were only platoon commanders. I had a much higher responsibility. And there's guys that were only platoon commanders and got these Navy combination medals or Navy achievement medals, things like that. And I got nothing. And so I was like,
Yeah.
well, I guess it was just lonely where I was, just because I was getting bounced around. No specific person took me on as like, you know, I think all the other company commanders kind of just saw me as a peer as I was being bounced around. So yeah, so in some cases, loneliness as a leader, it's that we need to look in the mirror and maybe we're doing something wrong, and that's why things are lonely. That's why we're feeling lonely. And other times, it just may be how the rocks, you know, big. Um,
Yeah, that's good, man. I appreciate you sharing a lot of that. And you bring up a really good point, and we speak to this in the book on a couple occasions. Not only are we to be, leaders in our organizations, but being leaders in our family. And so often we can hyper focus on our career, our job, especially in the military, because it just creates this atmosphere of like hypertension and deployments and being away so much that a lot of times our spouses, our families are kind of left as a sad to say, but almost like an afterthought because we have to we put so much attention on our career or military and things that are going on and taking care of our soldiers and making sure they come home safely. That we guys like you and I, you speak to me, man, when you say like communication, especially with our spouses, and learning how to do that well. We get really good at doing it with our soldiers, but that doesn't necessarily equal good communication with our spouses. Or for
oh,
me,
no,
my three daughters, right? Not the
yeah,
same level of communication needed between my soldiers, coworkers in the military, and my beautiful family. So, yeah, that speaks to me, man. I appreciate you kind of going that route with it. It's super important for us to one, look in the mirror as leaders. And this isn't this is I mentioned this book in our last podcast, and undoubtedly it'll come up more. But the book Good to Great, he talks about being a leader and being able to look either through a mirror or look through a window. And when things are going wrong, looking in a mirror is probably where we need to be looking at first. When
Yeah.
things are going well, we should probably look through a window and look at all the people that got us the success that we
Wow, that's
are
good.
seeing
Yeah.
and the reward. So, yeah, you spoke to it, man, and it's important that we first look in the mirror and see what am I doing wrong? What can I do differently? And gosh, you're in the leadership business long enough, you'll figure out that you're going to fail more than you succeed. And yeah, and communication is a key part in leadership of our family, and that's huge. No, I appreciate too the reference of you feel like you are doing everything right, and then you don't feel, there's times when we don't
Yeah.
feel like we are getting the recognition maybe that we have worked, and not necessarily, it's not that, our human instinct is like, I did this, so I should get this. But as we move into Christ-centered leadership, we're not doing it for the reward, more so is like doing it
Yep.
for the calling, the purpose of leading others and doing it well in a Christ-centered way. But we can't help to get to a point where it's, you work hard and you're told you're doing a great job, and then you get to a point where in the end there was no recognition. So then how do we handle that? And that is absolutely going to get us into this point of feeling lonely and even putting ourselves into isolation because nobody cares about me. Nobody recognizes what I'm doing. So that's good. My next question was kind of, I think, maybe we've already answered it, but where have you seen loneliness lead leaders off course, right? So maybe you've seen others who have kind of gone off into the isolation, as opposed to just feeling lonely, and where that has kind of led them off course. Do you, maybe your personal life, or have you observed other leaders get to a point where it led them off course?
Um, well, before I answer that, towards the end of your last before you ask that question, I was thinking of the danger of when you feel lonely and you're not being recognized or awarded appropriately, and if you're not prepared to just move on and be like, well, I know I did well, whatever. I don't need recognize. I know I was serving well, serving my calling, my purpose. That's most important. So I'm just going to move on. Like, it's very easy to now have animosity with peers who did get recognized, right? And like, how often does that destroy relationships, teams, organizations, because your peer got recognized and you think you did better, and now somehow you don't like them or whatever. Sounds very, you know, uh, whatever, middle school or whatever, but like that happens in adults so much. Yeah. To talk about this question, I don't have any specific story that's coming to mind. I do know, I just can't think of a specific example, but I do know it's probably affected me to make comfort based decisions before. What I mean by that is when leaders are feeling lonely, regardless of it's their fault or it's not their fault, whatever the case, we as humans, we want to have healthy relationships. Like we're designed for that, right? We're designed to have relationships with God. We're designed to have relationships with others, and we want those to be healthy and enjoyable. So when they're not, we feel that loneliness. It could cause us to react in certain ways to restore whatever whatever loneliness we're feeling, to try and restore that relationship. And from a leadership perspective, whether it's in the family, like you need to discipline a child. Like, you need to have a hard conversation with them. Whatever, a teenager, you may need to ground or whatever you need to do. Like, look, what you did was wrong, and here's the consequence. And it's going to cause some friction, some loneliness. You hate it because you feel like now there's some sort of divide or barrier with your child. And if we're not prepared for that, it could cause us to just not want to have the conversation, to just
Yeah.
brush it under the rug. And really, by biblical definition of love, that is not love. So when we focus on restoring those relationships because we feel lonely and we don't like that feeling, it can cause us to fall into the trap of a comfort based decision for the purpose of restoring a good feeling. When what needs to happen is to hold accountable, hold the standard, have a tough conversation in love, um, and maybe just like despite the loneliness we feel, maybe we feel hate from again from a child or something. Our love is unconditional, right? Certainly, a father's love for children must be unconditional, but even for our teammates, like if we're focused on mission success and the welfare of the team, we should be okay with periods of feeling lonely when we know that we are doing the best, making the best decisions for everybody, for the mission, even if it means we have to discipline, have a hard conversation. So I think that's where a lot of leaders get off course is because it's that natural tendency to just want to make feelings better. Just what we want this society, right, wants immediate gratification. We want that with happy feelings, you know. I think one of the lessons I wrote in the book, I think, is I forget the title, but it's like holiness, more or less, is a priority over happiness. Like sometimes, again, we live in a fallen world. We're not always going to experience happiness, but God does call us to be holy and to live right, in accordance with His will. Um, so yeah, I think that's where leaders get off course. They just get sidetracked from what the true purpose assignment is.
Yeah, that's good, Jordan, man. That's so good. So kind of trying to, you know, wrap this up in a way of kind of takeaways here. I think about, so we've gotten to a point where we've identified that being a leader can get us in a place where we feel lonely and why that is. And, we get to a point where there's not a lot of folks directly around us. And then acknowledging that we're never really alone, that Jesus is always with us. And then, you know, talking through different ways where we have found ourselves, kind of drifting into loneliness, and then observing where we have potentially isolated ourselves or see what that is kind of the danger zone of going from feeling lonely to isolation, and even like you said, getting to a point where we feel lonely and being ridiculed maybe means we're doing the right thing and we're being obedient into our calling and being able to manage the life of a leader, kind of wrap it up with kind of practical ways of helping us, helping our viewers, our readers understand, what are some practical ways to help prevent us from getting into the space of isolation. For me, the way I have found to help me, one is develop better communication skills with those that I love most and entrust most. Like, yeah, like, learning that, hey, I can talk to my wife about this. She wants me to talk to her about these things. And it's something I'm still working on. The more as we find ourselves outside the military or, in a job in the military that maybe we're home. Like for me, I've been, operational for, 24 years. And now I'm in a job where I'm not operational and I'm almost working banker hours and I'm home in the morning, for breakfast and I'm home at by 5 o'clock for dinner. And my wife and we're almost pretty much empty nesters. So now my wife and I are looking at each other like, how do we talk? How do we communicate? What is this married
Who
life
are
thing
you?
like?
Why are you here
You know,
so much?
yeah, we've been married for 22 years, but we're just now figuring it out because I've been gone so much and she's just been doing everything. But, one, identify that your spouse, your partner, your helper, as the Bible calls it, is there for a reason. God created woman from man as a helper to be there to walk through it with you. So that's one way for me, and I'm still learning that one. Another way for me, too, is really setting up my day with quiet time with God and that reading the Bible. There's no substitution.
Well,
And I used to think there was, but there is no substitution. Don't get me wrong. Our book and devotionals are good, but nothing substitutes the breath of God and the Bible.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's coming into that habit and that rhythm of quiet time with God, reading my Bible, underlining verses that really speak to me, talking to God in quietness about what that verse, what that section of the Bible that I underline, what is it speaking to me? How can I apply that to my life? And just really the rhythm of quietness to hear God and know that I'm not in this alone has been a hugely impactful for my life as a leader of an organization and a leader of my home. I don't know, is there anything that you could share as far as ways that you've helped navigate loneliness and leadership?
I'm thinking more of from you, Sharon, and the practical application. I'm thinking more of like preventing loneliness and leadership, which arguably those same things can help, help you get out of the loneliness and leadership. But one of the big things when I joined the Maxwell leadership team a few years ago, one of the first books I read and really was very eye opening and probably the biggest lesson that I learned in like that first year was how important establishing a relational connection is before communicating, whether that's communicating vision. Like I think the last episode we mentioned how people buy into the leader before they buy into the vision. It's like so there's like that connection there before people are like, okay, I see where he's going, I get it, I want to follow that direction. Uh, but having the connection before we really communicate, and it was convicting for me because I have 3 older boys. Communicating with them, I think, has been easier than communicating with my daughters, and then, I have 4 younger daughters and teenagers now. A couple of them are over 18, but, um, yeah, just that lesson of establishing a connection. And this past summer, I, went out to a church conference, with my church. I serve on the leadership board, and part of my role was to attend this conference. And when we were out there, I learned this acronym I never heard before, but man, it's so spot on. The acronym is BLESS. And it at the church conference, it was they're using it as a way for evangelism, like reaching people outside the church. But it fits any sort of like just relationship building type of situation. So the B is begin with prayer. All right. Pretty simple. Like you begin anything with prayer, anything you want to get into. But as we think of building a relationship, begin with prayer. And then the L is listen. And then the E is eat, which is really like do life with them, like be a friend, do things together, share a meal, whatever. So again, this whole acronym process was based on evangelism, like sharing the gospel with somebody. Now, I personally think the church does a lot of like, wanting to share the gospel, but there's no connection, right? They haven't actually made a relationship with somebody out there outside their walls. We often tend to be like, I invited so and so to church. I'm inviting so and so to church. Like, yeah, but is there a connection to where they actually want to go to church with you?
Yeah.
But yeah, so begin with prayer, listen, eat. And then the first S is serve. Like Jesus did that throughout the gospels. He just served people, sinners, whatever. He just served people. Somebody was crying for a healing. He broke away from the crowd and had some one-on-one time and healed them. But he just served. They didn't need to like accept him as the Messiah for him to heal them or do something to them, right? And then the last S, after those first 4 steps, the last one is share. Like, so you go through all those before you even share the gospel, before you even really, it's almost like certainly there's verbal communication in the process, but you're almost on your part, your mouth is closed until that last step. You're praying, you're listening, you're eating, right? You're being a friend, you're doing things with them, you're serving. And it's only after all that the connection is made, and now you're sharing them about Jesus. Communicating and in the team leadership construct, communicating something. So I really love that, and I think it fits right into what we've been talking about.
That's good. That's good. Well, In closing, and kind of reflecting on our conversation, I really think, loneliness is a part of being a leader. And if we're feeling lonely, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing anything wrong. And in fact, it may be confirming that we're carrying a lot of weight that God has meant for us to carry. And, He has built us to be this leader to carry that weight. But understanding that loneliness, healthy loneliness, can get us into a dangerous place of isolation.
Yeah.
And I think we've really, at least I hope we've helped our listeners understand that there are ways to prevent to get into isolation where, really we need to learn how to pull in the people around us, our family, our spouse, our closest friends to, share life with and community. And then, there are some actionable steps we can take to, one, ensure that we're a Christ-centered leadership, but really just, God being with us and understanding that He is with us. He is sharing life with us. We just have to make the time to listen to Him, to read His word, and quiet and still so we can hear His presence and, lead well in Christ centered leadership. Well, Jordan, this has been awesome, brother.
Yeah.
Number two
You.
in the books. And so I'm looking forward to future episodes for everybody out there. We will put links in the below so you can order our book or go to the Red Letter Leadership website. Where Jordan is doing some amazing stuff, webinars, leadership talks, things like that. Follow us on our social media, Instagram, LinkedIn. Let's connect. We'd love to hear questions. Tell us some topics. Maybe there's some readers out there that want us to talk about something that we spoke about in the book. We'd love to hear from the audience. Ask questions, comment below. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us know what you think about the podcast so we can continue to
Yeah.
improve. We will promise you we'll be a learning organization, and we will improve this based off of things that you guys want to hear and thoughts on the show. So we appreciate everybody. Jordan, I appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you, Ben, for sure.
All
Always
right. We'll
good.
see everybody next time.